looking, throwing in the end zone.
Montana, touchdown, John Taylor.
Young to the air, Young to Jerry Rice, touchdown San Francisco.
Young stumbles on the way back and fires up the middle. Pass is caught by Owens.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the 49ers Plus podcast. I'm your host, Al Moriello, and this is your source for the most objective 49ers discussion, plus entertaining sports and pop culture topics. And this week, 49er training camp officially kicked off, and Brock Purdy is not on the PUP list. We'll get some thoughts from John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. Nick Bosa is staying away from training camp until he gets an extension, which will be hopefully soon. Kyle Shanahan's thoughts on a few young players, some 49er players in the Pro Football Focus Top 50. We're going to talk Madden team ratings and the QB analysis, the last in our series of positional analyses for the 49ers. In the plus section, we're going to talk box office for Barbie, Oppenheimer, and Mission Impossible, a few new DC animated movies that were announced at San Diego Comic-Con earlier in the week. Secret Invasion on Disney Plus wrapped up. I have some thoughts on that. Running back values and contracts and what Saquon Barkley wound up signing for. I have lots of thoughts there. And just to add insult to injury, Justin Herbert signed a new mega contract with the Chargers. We'll dive into that as well. But like always, it starts with the 49ers, so let's get right into it.
Let's talk Niners.
So training camp is here. We got through the 40-plus days together without any real 49er news, and now we have players putting on the helmets, putting on some pads, maybe not in this first practice, but training camp is underway, so there's new actual stuff to overanalyze and over-talk about. But before we get into training camp, just wanted to let everybody know that everyone's favorite ex-49er quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, passed his physical with the Las Vegas Raiders. Remember, there was some issues with his foot, had to have surgery earlier on in the year or right after he actually signed his contract with the Raiders. There was some speculation if the Raiders were going to cut him. I never thought that would be the case. But since he did pass his physical, the 49ers will get a third-round compensation pick. If the Raiders did cut him, they would not have gotten that comp pick. And remember, compensatory picks, are based on a formula of players you've lost versus players you've signed, in addition to some minority hirings, such as a Ran Carthon as an executive, a D'Amico Ryans as a head coach for the Texans. But as of right now, for the 2024 draft, in addition to their, I believe, full 7 picks in each of the 7 rounds, they will also be getting 2 third-round picks, 2 fifth-round picks, and 1 sixth-round pick. And the way that the 49ers cap looks next year, about $13 million over with Nick Bosa's extension upcoming, they're going to have to hit on those picks, or at least most of those picks, to get some cheap labor in the coming year, since San Francisco management is going to be faced with some tough decisions. But on to training camp and on to Brock Purdy, who was announced he will not go on the PUP physically unable to perform list. He is cleared without restrictions. Now, I had wondered about the PUP list. I was making that my, not necessarily worst case scenario, but the sky is not falling scenario if he was put on it, because it's just an injury designation. But he's not. And per John Lynch, quote, "Now, having said that, we're sticking and we're adhering to a plan that's been put in place for some time. And he got after it the last couple of days," meaning he threw. "We upped his pitch count, so it was kind of the peak of the buildup. So he'll take off a day, but we believe in that plan." Per Kyle Shanahan, when Purdy returns, he will work with the first team when he practices. That he has come out and said nothing is set in stone, but that's essentially saying that Brock Purdy is the starter. He is QB1, pause, until further notice. Can crazy stuff happen in training camp? Can Brock fizzle if his arm's fatigued? Can Trey look good or Sam Darnold look good? Sure. Right now, Brock Purdy, we're not using Sharpie marker, we're using pencils. He's penciled in as QB1. It is literally his job to lose. And here is a quote from Kyle Shanahan. We're never going to have him go 3 days in a row. And so, like today, he threw just with his schedule from the weekend and everything. Tomorrow, he won't practice. Now, this is a quote from yesterday, so meaning he will not practice today, Wednesday. So the other guys, meaning Darnold and Lance, will do the same thing as OTAs. They'll both go with the ones, and then Brock will have practices 2 and 3 to go. Sounds like Brock is practicing Thursday the 27th and Friday the 28th, then take the next one off. So I don't think he'll be throwing on Saturday the 29th. This is a ramp up for week 1 at Pittsburgh on September 10th. And as of today, that is 6.5 weeks away. So Brock Purdy recovered early, quicker than many anticipated. Originally, it was thought that he wouldn't be ready until around August 20th, which would give him 3 weeks to get ready for week 1 at Pittsburgh. And that was a big question when the surgery was announced, when it took place, when he was a couple weeks out, seeing, the timetable. And mid/third week of August was initially earmarked by a lot of physicians and experts looking at the general timetable for recovery and even using former 49er quarterback Nick Mullins as a proxy. The fact that he's coming back basically 3 weeks sooner than that gives him a month and a half to get ready for the regular season. Now, you heard what Kyle Shanahan said. They're not going to have him throw 3 days in a row, at least not initially. But the buildup is going to be there. The building chemistry with the receivers is going to be there. 3 weeks probably would have been enough time anyway. But the fact that it's 6.5 now, N of 1, I feel really good about that for Brock if everything continues as planned with the elbow, the arm strength, everything getting back into rhythm, that he's got a full training camp, more or less, minus those every third day, to throw with the team and with the receivers. But what else does this mean or show? That, again, the 49ers don't leak information, guys. Now, this could have come from Brock's camp, from Brock's friend, from someone saying like how he's throwing and how he's feeling, from one of his rehab folks, from his surgeon, from someone on the 49ers medical staff. They saw him. It's not like Brock Purdy arrived today or yesterday. He's been there. They've seen how he's progressed. And this idea of him starting training camp with no restrictions beyond the self-imposed not throwing 3 days in a row, they didn't come up with this today. They've had this idea for probably a couple days or couple weeks, and nobody leaked it. No one mentioned it, not Ian Rappaport, not anyone on, ESPN, not Adam Schefter, not Jeff Darlington, nobody. And these are people, guys, that had opinions on Sam Darnold for the past month, saying what they're hearing is that Sam Darnold is the number 2 going into camp. From who? Why didn't you hear about Brock Purdy's elbow and how well he's recovered, how far ahead of the estimated timetable he is? Which is why any of the media, quote-unquote, experts, regardless of what they're hearing or not, if you're not giving sources, you could be making stuff up, right? You could. Maybe they didn't really hear anything about Darnold, and that was just their guess. Or one person says it on a social media channel or media somewhere, and that's their source, and everybody's pulling off the same source about Darnold being the number 2. He might. I don't know. I'm not there. But where are all these NFL detectives uncovering the fact that Purdy's ahead of schedule? I didn't hear anything. Chances are you didn't either. So how much are we going to take all their speculation with a grain of salt moving forward? Now, quickly, 4 players who did not take part in training camp today and probably will not for the foreseeable future. We mentioned Purdy. Darrell Luter Jr., who I mentioned on last podcast, was put on the PUP list, and it was actually a bone bruise after hyperextending his knee. Mitch Wishnowsky, the punter, hurt himself lifting weights. He's on the non-football injury list. And Nick Bosa, because of his contract situation, did not take part today and probably will not this week unless something quickly gets worked out. Now, regarding Nick Bosa, being away from camp until his extension makes sense for everybody. Management knew it was coming. Lynch, Shanahan, this is not a surprise to anyone. There's no ill feelings towards this. I think, they would, of course, like one of their best players out on the field, but they can understand you don't step on the field until you have a contract. God forbid you just take a bad step and something happens. So Bosa has been placed on the reserve, did not report list. No news here. They're going to work a contract out. Hell, they worked a contract out with Debo when he scrubbed the 49ers from his social media, basically saying he wanted to get traded. And that still worked out to him getting $25 million a year for 3 years. Bosa hasn't said anything like that. He said that he wants to be here. They're going to work out something to make him one of, if not the highest paid defensive player in NFL history. And here's a quote from General Manager John Lynch. Quote, "We're working. We're having really good communication with his agent, and we're working diligently to try to come to an agreement. I think the challenge is you're talking about a real special player. You're talking about one of the better players in the league. You could argue that it could simplify things, but I think at times it's just finding that sweet spot. We're committed to working towards that. I have no doubt it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when, right? There's 6.5 weeks till the regular season starts. I'm sure that'll be worked out well before then. I can't imagine otherwise. Now, head coach Kyle Shanahan had some thoughts on a couple young players that I wanted to share. So second-year player, wide receiver Danny Gray, last year's third-round pick out of SMU, only had 1 reception last year, and he was asked, what could Gray do to get on the field more? He's not in the doghouse or anything. There is a learning curve for a lot of players, but especially offensive players, coming out of college. He wasn't a first-round pick like Brandon Ayuk. He wasn't a second-round pick like Deebo Samuel. Plus, then you had Deebo and Ayuk on the team last year, so the best he was going to do was be the number 3 receiver, but that was Juwan Jennings. How often did the 49ers go 4 wide? So the deck was stacked against Danny Gray from the jump, but he is the fastest player on the team, or at least on offense. They want to utilize that more, but they also want him to be a bit more well-rounded. And here's a quote from Shanahan. Anytime you're the fastest guy on the team and stuff, you are a guy who can make defenses defend all 3 levels. But he's got skills. He's got a skill set where he can be out there doing everything. But he's got to get more consistent. So eventually he can dominate that role that he's most talented at, right? Run the full route tree. You can't be a player that just comes out and runs a go route or a post route. I mean, the team's defensive coordinators are smart enough. They're going to know, oh, Gray's on the field, maybe have a corner play off or something. And he's not such a dynamic player that teams are going to game plan against that. Needs to work on the route tree, just needs to get better at everything, including blocking, and could see more playing time. But remember, Ray McLeod's on the team too. As a returner, he's fast as well, more seasoned route runner. Danny Gray's got his work cut out for him, in addition to Ronnie Bell, 7th-round draft pick out of Michigan this past April, who's going to push him for playing time. So we'll see, how Danny Gray evolves as a player. Javon Kinlaw was next, and here's what Kyle Shanahan had to say about him. Kinlaw has been unbelievable. I mean, you guys see how he looks. And he's gone a full year with no setbacks. For the first time in a couple of years, he's been healthy enough to get himself in a position to where he can be treated like everyone else, just getting normal reps and everything. And if he's able to do that, I think things will work out for him very well. So this is his 4th year. Kinlaw has missed 24 games the last 2 seasons due to injury. At best, he's the number 3 defensive tackle behind Eric Armstead and Javon Hargrave. Not a bad thing. That's going to mean, still it's a year plus out of ACL reconstruction. not asking him to be a starter, less wear and tear on the body, and need that, again, it could be a Brock Purdy situation where there's a gradual buildup in terms of snaps in the preseason, training camp, and of course, into the regular season. And we'll see, how he performs. If he performs well, then the 49ers this year are going to have to make a decision at the end of the season. What's his worth? It's a contract year for him. That's not to say that he's going to battle through injuries, although players, NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, hockey, have been known to do that. You put your best foot forward when you're in a contract year. But he's a big guy. You don't know how that knee is going to hold up, if it's going to be a chronic thing, but first things first. Let's hope that he could stack good days, good weeks, good games together. And it's always good making, difficult choices on your team, because that means that you performed as a player. And I think that's what all of us are hoping for Javon Kinlaw. Defensive end Drake Jackson in his second year said what, Shanahan said what a lot of us have heard before and know. Quote, Drake had to get in much better shape to make it through the whole year. And he stayed here right when the season ended. That's why he's had great OTAs. He stayed here the 40 days in between minicamp and training camp, kept doing everything he had done since February, and he's still continuing to climb. So we're excited about him. So remember, Drake Jackson did not play in the playoffs, missed the last couple games of the regular season, essentially hit the rookie wall, put on weight, put on good weight. That should help with some durability, help if he potentially kicks inside on pass rushing downs, potentially. But a second-year player that the 49ers are hoping / expecting a lot out of in that D-end rotation between Bosa, himself, Cleveland Ferrell, Austin Bryant, Robert Beal, Kerry Hyder. They need a strong, and by strong I don't mean physically strong, although that would help being a football player, but a strong, viable rusher opposite Nick Bosa. He may not be a speed rusher, but as long as you're getting pressure, the sacks will come. And of course, the addition of Javon Hargrave on the inside, who had more hurries himself than all the 49er D tackles combined last year, will just make that defense, that much more dangerous and kick into maybe even another gear. And lastly, Deebo Samuel. So apparently, he's been working out really hard. He's in really good shape. Reports saying that he's in the best shape since his rookie year, 2019. Here's a funny quote from Shanahan. Never had a grown man send me so many pictures with his shirt off, but it looks good. And I've seen this a lot on social media, 49ers websites. A lot, I guess because it's summertime, a lot of players are posing or working out with their shirt off. Good for them. And I guess, as a head coach, you want to keep in contact with your players, video messages, text messages, whatever. No matter if you're the coach or not, if you're getting an adult male just keeps sending you topless pics, I guess you just got to roll with it and just be glad that you're not seeing any spare tire weight or anything, and that he looks like he's in good shape, and hopefully, obviously, the cardio and the flexibility, especially with his hamstrings, is going to be there as well. Couple signings. They signed linebacker Kiava Tizzino, who most recently played in the USFL with the Pitt Maulers, and cornerback Terrence Marshall, who was with the Titans last year. He's been in the league for about, 9 years, 5'11", 191 pounds. Remember I mentioned the past couple podcasts that they have 89 spots, one spot open for their 90-man training camp roster. Between that and Mitch Wishnowsky going on the non-football injury list, that's why they were able to make 2 signings, bringing in a linebacker, which was questionable just given the talent and depth that they have at that position. But I did say that corner was one of the spots that they could look at in addition to tight end, safety, and potentially running back. And with Darrell Luter down for an undetermined amount of time, it makes sense bringing another cornerback into the mix. So now let's transition to Pro Football Focus, released their top 50, and the 49ers had 6 players crack the Pro Football top 50. So Trent Williams, left tackle, was number 3, Nick Bosa, defensive end, number 6, Fred Warner, Linebacker at 14, George Kittle, tight end at 39, Christian McCaffrey at running back was number 44, and Deebo Samuel, wide receiver, was 50. I think, though, if you're going to pick the top 5 players on the team, I think it's pretty safe to say those are the 5 that you were going to pick. And for conversation's sake, San Francisco had the most players in the Pro Football Focus top 50 with 6. Behind them, the Chiefs with 4. And then Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, the Jets, and Cleveland, all with 3. So a talented roster, but it's interesting how this did not translate into a high overall team ranking for the upcoming Madden 24 video game across Xbox and PlayStation and PC. So the 49ers have the 9th highest rated team with an 86 out of 100. So it's a team that is a top 2 team, top 3 team in the NFC. I know quarterback, a lot of people are going to say, is uncertain. And a top probably 5 or 6 team in the NFL, but they're the number 9 ranked team in Madden. Let's go through the top 10. The Chiefs at a 92 rating, Eagles 91, Bills 90, Bengals 89, Cowboys 88, Ravens 87, Browns 87, Dolphins 86, Niners 86, and the Chargers 85. Take that for what it's worth. Already, players are not happy with their Madden rating. I think defensive tackle Javon Hargrave was rated as an 84 or an 86, which he said he's going to alter his rankings to beef himself up a little bit. And that actually was low in my mind when he was considered the number 1 free agent in the free agent class this past March. And to have like an 84, 86 rating seemed kind of low to me. So Javon Hargrave, knock yourself out. Now, from Madden ratings to a quarterback analysis, the last position that I wanted to tackle, although I've tackled the quarterback position quite a bit in recent podcasts discussing the whole Purdy Lance dynamic, but let's go through it for completeness' sake and some additional thoughts as we roll into training camp. So obviously the 4 quarterbacks on the roster: Brock Purdy, Trey Lance, Sam Darnold, and Brandon Allen, probably in that order when things kick off for real on September 10th. Now, they're going to keep 3. Kyle Shanahan in a recent interview mentioned it's not out of the realm of possibility to keep 4. And I will say, he's probably right. 3 on the active roster, Brandon Allen on the practice squad. Last year, the 49ers thought so highly of Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, last pick in the draft, 7th rounder, that they kept him in addition to Trey Lance, the starter, and Jimmy Garoppolo, the backup. This year, Brock Purdy has vaulted to QB1, at least for now, right? Always got to keep it objective, at least for now, with Lance and Darnold battling for the number 2 spot, and Brandon Allen is going to be 4th, barring an injury or anything, and should land on the practice squad. They kept 3 last year with uncertainty at the number 3 quarterback spot in Brock Purdy. Why wouldn't you keep 3 this year when you have 3 players with starting experience in the league? Trey Lance with the least amount, but a player that they should still be high on. Sam Darnold, 55 starts, and Purdy undefeated in the games that he finished or played the majority of the snaps. Now, let's just talk about money for the other 3 quarterbacks. So Trey Lance, he's not going to get released. I don't think anyone's even discussing that he would get released. But if he were to get traded this offseason, the Niners would be on the hook for a $5.5 million cap hit, but free up $3.7 million. If they were to wait until next year, which I believe would or should be the case if Purdy has another good season and stays healthy, if they trade him next offseason, they would be on the hook again for $5.5 million, but save $5.3 million. Sam Darnold, they're not going to release him. I don't think he's going anywhere anyway, since they signed him on day one of free agency. I don't care how badly the Packers need a viable backup quarterback or other teams out there that may suffer an injury during training camp or the preseason. But for conversation's sake, if they were to trade Darnold, they would be on the hook for $1.5 million against the cap this season and save $4.2 million. And lastly, Brandon Allen, if he was released, a $200,000 cap hit, but save $892,000. And essentially that $200,000 is probably going to be more than he makes on the practice squad, but I think he was guaranteed that, I believe. So he's going to get, I don't know if he gets that plus practice squad salary should he make the practice squad, but there's your cap hit and savings for the 4 quarterbacks. Okay. So now let's talk Trey Lance a little bit. If Purdy is, penciled in his QB1, if the slow ramp up goes as projected, and he builds off of a very good year one, Lance really needs to win the backup quarterback spot. And here's the simple reason why. Not because of where he was drafted, not because of how much he was making, not because it would save some face for Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, and not because, he should be able to beat out Sam Darnold. Why? Why should he automatically be able to beat out Sam Darnold? They were both number 3 picks. Sam Darnold has a lot more experience in the NFL than Trey Lance does. Yes, Lance has more experience in Shanahan's offense, and he adds, some mobility to the mix as well. But the real reason why, if Lance does not win the QB1 spot, why he really needs to win the QB2 spot, or if it's close, or even if Darnold's a hair better, not significantly, drastically better than Trey Lance, but if he's a hair better than Trey Lance, Lance should still be the number 2 in Shanahan's mind because of the run-pass option packages that Lance could bring to the table, even in spot duty. Bringing him in inside the 10, run-pass option. Bringing him in like they did his rookie year with Jimmy G, although now he actually has starting experience, right? He can actually play a drive or a couple plays and make a defense wonder, is he going to throw it or is he going to run it? And again, he's not Mike Vick. He's not Lamar Jackson. He's not Josh Allen or, Russell Wilson. But at least it gives that added dimension of, if it is a pass play and the play breaks down, he can pick something up with his legs, or a true RPO. Fake to McCaffrey, keep it. Extra wrinkles that you want defenses and defensive coordinators to plan for when going up against you every week. If he's clearly number 3, I think that's a big problem. Optics, I think it looks bad. From a fan standpoint, there's going to be, the Trey homers are going to revolt, or maybe they'll find it revolting and vomit because he couldn't beat out Sam Darnold for the number 2 spot. But you're leaving that skill set. I'm not saying it's going to translate onto the field 100% of the time, but you're leaving that skill set on the bench, because if he's the number 3 quarterback, he can only come in if QBs 1 and 2 are hurt. You cannot play him. He would be the emergency number 3 designated quarterback. You can't just go to him whenever. If he's the number 2, you can. But if he's number 3, you can't, unless the 2 quarterbacks in front get injured. Just something to think about. And if he is number 3, and clearly number 3, does he or his representation then request or demand a trade? The clock is ticking on that, though, right? The clock's ticking for him, and the clock's ticking for any team that might think about trading for Trey Lance. And I can't even think of a team off the top of my head who would consider it. In the offseason, maybe Atlanta. Were they going to go with Desmond Ridder? No, they signed Taylor Heineke as the backup. Could it have been Houston? It looks like they're going to give maybe C.J. Stroud the keys to start week one. It could have been Indianapolis. Anthony Richardson might start, but if not, it's Gardner Minshew. It looks like it's going to be Bryce Young in Carolina, or Andy Dalton is a 3-game bridge. There's no spot now where Trey Lance is an actual need or an immediate need, unless someone gets hurt, and that could happen. But why I say the clock is ticking is because every day, every week that Trey Lance is on the 49ers and potentially sliding to the number 3 quarterback spot. And I'm not hoping that. I'm just saying it's a possibility, right? It's a possibility Lance is the 3rd best quarterback on this team. I would still bet that he's the backup, but it's a possibility that for whatever reason he falls to number 3. But for every day and week he's with the 49ers, that's a day and a week he's losing learning the system of another team. So if he is not going to be the starter and he's not comfortable with that, and he feels like he's sliding to number 3 and you want out, he's going to have to make noise quickly. I don't think he's that type of kid. I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's going to be the number 2. I really do. Not for the reasons of the RPO, but I think he will beat out Sam Darnold. He's been in this offense for 2 full years. This is his 3rd training camp. That's got to count. It's got to count for something, guys, right? So I've said it before. I'll say it again. I think all 3 quarterbacks are on the week 1 roster, and I think it's Purdy, Lance is number 2, and Darnold will be the emergency number 3. So now here's, I want to conclude with a quote that George Kittle had about Trey Lance this offseason. Quote, "What I've seen since last season throughout OTAs, today he has a confidence to him. He doesn't look like he's second guessing himself. He doesn't look like he's thinking about the plays at all. The play's called, he knows what it is, and he steps in the huddle with confidence. If you can just do those things, it just gives you an opportunity to be great, because you're not thinking about anything else." This sounds eerily familiar to what Kyle Juszczyk said about Brock Purdy his rookie year. It got to the point early on where he was reacting. He wasn't overthinking things. He was trusting the offense. He was finding the open man on time in rhythm. Reacting. It's not paralysis by analysis. I just want to leave the 49ers section with this thought. Talent is great. Being able to run is great. Having a rocket arm is great. The NFL is littered with ex-quarterbacks who had huge arms and or could run and didn't necessarily have the processing power between the ears. What Brock Purdy did as a rookie, George Kittle is seeing it in Trey Lance in his 3rd year in training camp. That's not to say that Lance can't build upon that and become a superstar quarterback, a Pro Bowl quarterback, highly effective, whatever adjectives you want to use. But if you're going to think that about Lance, then you have to think the same about Brock, about the leap from year 1 to year 2, and then from year 2 to year 3, God willing, for everybody involved. I'm not saying I'm a Purdy fan or I'm rooting for him, but if you're going to say, well, it took, Trey year 3, it's clicking, he's getting it, that's great. Then what is Brock going to look like year 2? What is Brock going to look like year 3? You can't talk about growth for one without suggesting the possibility of growth for another. Now, the tiebreakers, the arm strength, the running, how fantastic is that going to be in training camp or the preseason, or if Brock sprains an ankle or whatever, to leapfrog Lance ahead of Brock in the pecking order? I don't know. I think to me, it's got to be pretty damn good, because Brock right now has that processing power between the ears. Lance, other than Kittle saying it, he still has to show it, right? So that concludes the 49ers section of the podcast for today. Stick around. Upcoming in the plus section, we're going to talk box office for Barbie, Oppenheimer, Mission Impossible, some DC animated movies that I'm excited about that are coming out, Secret Invasion, wrapped up. I have some thoughts, running backs, contracts, and what they think their value is, and concluding with Justin Herbert's groundbreaking and immense extension with the Chargers. Stay with us.
It's plus time.
So Hollywood had a much needed bounce back weekend at the box office, and it's thanks to Barbie and Oppenheimer. Barbie is absolutely killing it. It opened with a $162 million domestic opening weekend, and Friday to Tuesday, yesterday, it's taken in $214 million domestically, $472 million worldwide. It cost $145 million to produce, and at that 2.5 times multiplier for turning a profit, it would have needed to make $363 million to make a profit. It's already $110 million over that, so anything else is continued gravy for the film starring Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling, who looks a lot like Lions quarterback Jared Goff. You know, you might want to check that out. And as for Margot Robbie, you know, it's funny. Obviously, she's a superstar between, you know, Wolf of Wall Street and Harley Quinn and other movies, you know, Suicide Squad that I'm forgetting. But she was in a show about 10 years ago called Pan Am, which was about Pan Am airplanes and stewardesses and pilots in, I guess, maybe the 50s or 60s. And she was in a supporting role there. Christina Ricci was really one of the stars. And my wife and I, you know, we're watching that. And I've always been and still am a fan of, you know, shows and movies that are like period pieces that take place in just different time periods. I just, some of it's quaint. I find it really interesting. And I remember looking at my wife saying, you know, even though she's not doing that much in the show, she's going to be a star. And the only other time I've said that about someone that I can remember was Christina Hendricks. So the redheaded, I think she was a secretary on AMC's Mad Men, was in the short-lived sci-fi series Firefly for one season. She was only in 2 or 3 episodes, but I said the same sort of thing, like that she's, even though it was a guest appearance or she wasn't a regular, that she had big things in store. So at least from what I remember, calling out 2 actors or actresses that I thought big things were ahead for, I'm 2 for 2. So Hollywood, if you ever are wondering which actors or at least actresses you think you want my opinion on who's going to be the next big thing, give me a ring. Between that and calling out turd flop movies, I could save you hundreds of millions of dollars if you just get my opinion on what movies to maybe not move forward with, because there's been a shit ton recently. Although Barbie's doing great, Oppenheimer had an $82 million domestic opening weekend, Friday to Tuesday, $107 million domestically, $220 million worldwide. That cost $160 million estimated to produce. So it needs to make about $400 million worldwide to turn a profit, and it'll probably get there or get really close. It's a 3-hour movie. My wife and I are planning on seeing it this upcoming weekend. Both films got phenomenal reviews, Rotten Tomatoes, critics, and audience scores alike. And Jonathan Nolan, you know, between Tenet and the Dark Knight trilogy, Interstellar, like Inception's made a lot of great films. I still don't think there's a need for like a 3-hour movie or really 2.5 hours. I think 2-hour max for a lot of films, I think is sufficient. But excited to see that. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Now, this has been out since July 12th. Had only a $54 million domestic opening weekend, and to date, it's taken in $124 million domestically, $376 million worldwide. I found something that said it cost $290 million to produce, but Part 2 is coming out next year, and that might be a cumulative total to produce both movies. regardless, from weekend 1 to weekend 2, it had a 62% drop in box office sales, the largest drop of the franchise. And the last movie, Mission Impossible Fallout from 2018, had a slightly larger domestic opening weekend, 61 million compared to 54 million for Dead Reckoning. And that movie overall made 220 million domestically, $791 million worldwide. I don't think it's going to get to the domestic number, and I certainly don't think it's going to double where it's at, more than double where it's at now, to hit that worldwide figure. And that movie was made for $178 million. That certainly turned a profit. Dead Reckoning Part 2 comes out next year. It's just not looking good. And, Tom Cruise, God bless him, 60 years old, doing his own stunts. And I was intrigued by the advertising campaign, at least the TV commercials, and I'm sure you've seen it, of Tom Cruise kind of going off of a jump and then kind of diving, off of a cliff, and how many times he had to do that to get it right. So like the behind the scenes aspect of the marketing to me was interesting, but not interesting enough to get the numbers to where Hollywood management is hoping it could be. But again, if that $290 million cost is spread between two movies, then I think Dead Reckoning Part 1 and Part 2 has a decent chance, or a pretty good chance in some, to turn a profit. But right now, at least this movie is a huge step down from 2018's Fallout in terms of box office receipts. And this week, Friday the 28th, Disney's Haunted Mansion will come out. A movie that has a $158 million price tag associated with it. It needs, again, $400 million to turn a profit. Do I think that'll happen? No. Disney, Indiana Jones, Elemental, and Haunted Mansion coming out. Not a good cinematic past couple months for the Mouse House. Now, other movies that I'm actually excited about, it was announced at San Diego Comic-Con last week that DC will have 2 new animated movies releasing next year. And both of them are based on really iconic DC comic book runs, or miniseries anyway. The first being Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was a 1985 comic book series, 12 issues, written by Marv Wolfman and illustrated by George Perez. It was really the first major event book in comic book history, and it coincided with DC Comics' 50th anniversary at the time. And the idea of the story was they really tried to clean up their continuity. They wanted to condense the DC multiverse into a single universe, a single reality. It really could be said that it's DC's most influential story ever, and it spawned a half a dozen or more other crises event comic books, most, if not all of which I've read and owned, and they're cosmic things. I'm a big fan of that when it comes to comic book stories, and a lot of times there's a great creative team, assembled with that. So I'm going to get to the interesting part of this after I talk about the second animated movie coming out, and that being Watchmen. And this is based on the 1986 comic book series. Again, 12 issues, written by Alan Moore, illustrated by Dave Gibbons. Really the seminal graphic novel. It's, a lot of people have said it's when comic books grew up, or it's when people realized comic books can be adult and dark and gritty and not thought of as something that's, in the Sunday newspaper, the funny pages, as it were. It's a comic book that won the 1988 Hugo Award, the first comic book ever to do that, which is science fiction and fantasy's highest award, obviously for stories and authors, etc. And it was named to Time Magazine's 100 Best English Language Novels produced since 1923. Highly acclaimed, spawned a sequel comic book called Doomsday Clock that came out 6 or 7 years ago, a sequel TV series on HBO that won the Emmy for Best Limited Drama Series, and a movie by Zack Snyder in 2009. Now, here's why both of these animated movies are interesting. One, because Watchmen has had other iterations. I mean, granted, the HBO series was truly a sequel that took place, 30 years in the future in, I think, Omaha, of all places. And Crisis on Infinite Earth was part of the Arrowverse on the CW. And it wasn't an identical story, but something similar was done in 2019 across some of the CW's, DC character show offerings. It's not that it's played out by any means. When they both come out, I'm going to watch them, Watchmen, and I'll watch Crisis on Infinite Earths. It would have been interesting, though, since they are 12-issue series, if they made this episodic. And I'm not saying 12 episodes. If there's enough content for one 20 or 25-minute episode for each comic book, then great. The more the better. I'll watch all 12. But I don't know if like an hour and a half, hour 45, I don't think it's going to be 2 hours. 2 hours at the most movie is going to do justice to either of these stories. Maybe you stretch it out to 3 hours and give maybe 6 30-minute episodes, something like that. I'm excited for it. I think Watchmen is going to be R-rated because just given the source material, and DC just dropped or released this week, I think, their first R-rated animated movie. It was a Justice League movie. I think Justice League Warworld. I believe it was either the first R-rated or one of the first. And listen, just because it's a cartoon doesn't mean it has to be childlike. Does it have to be G-rated, PG, or even PG-13? You can go R. Like, why not? The format shouldn't dictate the rating. It should be the story, right? Content over anything else. So 2 movies coming out that will probably be improvements on anything that DC has put out recently or will put out next month with the ill-fated Blue Beetle coming out in August. Now, transitioning from DC TV to Marvel TV, and it's really Disney Plus TV. So Secret Invasion wrapped up its 6 episodes today. Middle of the road show. Actually, not even middle of the road show. Middle of the road reviews. 58% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, 63% audience score. As I mentioned, only 6 episodes, some as short as 38 minutes, which is really like 34 minutes or 33 minutes when you don't count the intro or the credits. But again, it's something where, the story, the amount of story dictates how many episodes, how long the episodes are going to be. And if you're not aware, this is actually based on a comic book series from between 5 and 10 years ago. I don't have the date off the top of my head, but it's about Nick Fury trying to stop an invasion of shape-shifting aliens called Skrulls to ultimately save humanity. And the Skrulls are trying to start World War III between Russia, the US, and everybody else by having a bomb go off in Russia. And ultimately they want World War III so the Earth can go to shit and they could just pick up the pieces and live here, since the Skrulls no longer have a planet or a home to call their own. So this stars Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury. Ben Mendelsohn plays a Skrull. Ben Mendelsohn was the white uniformed, white cloaked Imperial from Rogue One who was responsible for building the Death Star. And Emilia Clarke, obviously from Game of Thrones, is his Skrull daughter. So those are the 3 main stars. Now, like all the Marvel shows, I was entertained by it. Had some decent action. I mean, once you get past the whole who's a Skrull, who's not, how much of the Skrulls infiltrated the US government or the world stage, etc. And, Nick Fury's going to kind of save the day. They did like a hand-waving gesture of like, hey, Nick, why can't you call down your superpowered friends, meaning the Avengers, to help clean this mess up? And, there was a response of, well, you can't have them come down because then the Skrulls can turn into them. You don't know who's who. It's and Nick Fury took this as a really personal type of mission. I would say this show was fine. Like all Marvel shows, Ms. Marvel, She-Hulk, Loki, WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I don't know if I'm forgetting any. I know what it is kind of going into it. Even so, I think this show was kind of just okay. It wasn't paint by numbers action or anything like that. I think of all the Marvel shows thus far, while I was entertained by it, it was my least favorite. If you haven't watched it and you have some inkling or desire to, I think you should. I think you'll find parts of it, if not all of it, entertaining. If by episode maybe 2 or 3, you kind of see where it's going and it's not your thing, then stop, right? No one's putting a gun to your head. Not nearly my favorite of the Marvel offerings thus far, but glad I watched it. But now moving on to the big thing that happened in sports, at least in the NFL this week, in terms of discussion, and it's running backs, contracts, their value, and their perceived value. But I want to start off with a question. What's more useless, a human being's appendix or a bunch of running backs getting on a Zoom call to discuss what they can do about being quote unquote underpaid? That's a tough one. It might actually be a tie. Now, on that Zoom call were 5 of the highest paid running backs per average annual value. Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, and Josh Jacobs. So Nick Chubb averaging $12.2 million a year, signed a contract with $17 million guaranteed. We'll get to Saquon in a few minutes. Derrick Henry of the Titans, $12.5 million average, $25 million guaranteed. Christian McCaffrey, highest paid, $16 million average, $36.3 million guaranteed. And Josh Jacobs has a $10.1 million unsigned franchise tag. And we'll see how far he is willing to take this. Now, Browns running back Nick Chubb made a good point. It's an unfortunate one, but it's a good one. Quote, right now, there's really nothing we can do. We're kind of handcuffed with the situation. We're the only position that our production hurts us the most. If we go out there and run for 2,000 yards with so many carries the next year, they're going to say you're probably worn down. It's tough. It hurts us at the end of the day, meaning being productive, being a bell cow running back hurts running backs at the end of the day. He's right. It sucks. It's a real catch-22 that's viewed as a disposable position. And it's unfortunate for someone like a Chubb or a Henry that's getting his... Now, they've still made a ton of money, right? When you're talking about not just the guarantees, $70 million guaranteed for Chubb, $25 for Henry, $36 for McCaffrey. There's still the salaries on top of that. And I think that's something when we get to Saquon Barkley that I don't want to gloss over. Guaranteed is most important, but it's not like a running back is only getting guaranteed money. There's still base salary associated with that. The problem comes when most of the base salary is in the latter years or last year of the contract, and you can cut that player without owing him that $3, $4, $5, $7 million base salary. That's the final year of the contract. That's how all contracts are structured. It sucks. And I know running backs are trying to get more guaranteed money. And I have a thought about that again, once we get down to Saquon Barkley. But before we get there, I want to correct something you may have seen on social media. You may have heard on an ESPN or an NFL network or a sports talk radio where there was something floating around that running backs on average make less than punters. All right, now let me start out with the facts. Mathematically, this is correct. Now the question is why? Here's the answer. Because every team has one punter. Who's their starting punter? No one carries a backup punter, and I don't even know if any teams had punters on practice squads last year. Whereas all teams have at least 3, if not 4 running backs on their roster, and only their starter is paid well. The number 3 or number 4 running back might be making $700,000-$800,000 a year, under $1 million. So when you average out 4 running backs per team across 32 teams and compare it to 32 punters, yes, on average per year, punters mathematically may make more than running backs. But that's not, it's true, but it's deceiving. So here's what I did. I compared the average annual salaries of the top 5 running backs to the top 5 punters and the bottom 5 running backs, meaning 28, 29, 30, 31, and 32, because there's 32 teams in the league, right? And the bottom 5 paid punters. Again, punters that are paid 27th, 28th, 29th, 29th, 30th, 31st, and 32nd. So you can see how full of shit this post or number that people are spouting is. So the top 5 running backs in the league average $13.4 million per year. The top 5 highest paid punters average $3.3 million. That is a $10.1 million difference, folks. The bottom 5 running backs, and some of these aren't starters, some of these are backups, average $2.2 million per year. The bottom 5 punters average $950,000 a year. That is nearly a $1.3 million difference. So statistics can be skewed any which way that the math actually allows you to do it. And if you want to use some of that new math that they're teaching kids in school that I have no idea how or why they're teaching kids to do math this way, they might open up other avenues that you could twist the numbers to your liking. So yes, is it mathematically true? Sure. But you have to peel back the onion a little bit, folks. Wonder why. Ask why. Don't take the headline at face value. Talking about value, let's get back to the running back discussion and where their heads are at. And here's listen, it's a tough position, right? They take a beating. They get worn down. By the time you're 30, or even 29, but 30 is really you don't want to be on the wrong side of 30 because you're really not getting a running back job, or it's very rare. You're out of the league. So they have a finite window, whether it's, say 7 to 10 years, to make as much money as they can. And when you make that money, maybe you don't need 4 cars or 17 diamond chains. Yeah, buy your parents a house, pay off their mortgage. You don't need an entourage. You don't need to be paying people to hang out with you. I mean, are they going to want to hang out with you anymore? You're not a star. You're a washed up NFL player. You are going to make enough money. Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, even running backs that are making $5 million a year, that if you don't even have to be a brain surgeon. You don't have to be super smart. Just be judicious. Yeah, it may not be sexy putting it in a money market account, making 4 or 5% a year, but you don't have to open up your own friggin' car dealership or restaurant or chase bad investments. You can live well. Barkley, Chubb, McCaffrey, Jacobs, Henry, and lesser running backs. But let me get off my soapbox. Everything in life, guys, has a value. the type of house you buy, the type of car you buy, clothes, food, pets, and yes, jobs. That's why there are salary ranges for jobs, independent of your industry. Go on Glassdoor, go on Indeed. You'll see salary ranges for whatever industry you're looking in. Now, sometimes they're stupid. But I've seen for, like, I'm a creative director, there'd be, $150,000 range based on experience. Like, that's not a salary range. At most, it should be $25,000. At most. But everything has a value or a value range. And the market dictates that, not your own opinion. We all have self-inflated opinions and values of ourselves. How smart we think we are. How good looking we think we are. Our opinions. We all think that our opinions are right most of the time versus other things. Our kids' abilities, our sports teams, whatever it is. If it's something we like or love, we probably hold it in higher esteem than others. Your value as an employee, in this case a running back, is no different. I collect sports cards. I've been collecting comic books for 30 plus years. There are price guides. Beckett. You can go to Beckett.com and get a subscription and look up action figures, sports cards, comic book cards, Hot Wheels and Matchbox cards, and it'll tell you in a vacuum what something is worth based on its condition, right? Like mint, near mint, very good, fine, etc. But something's really only worth what someone else is willing to pay for it. If I have a comic book that a price guide says is worth $100, but I'm seeing on eBay other people are selling it and it's really only going for about $70, $75, then right now, it could change in a couple months, it's worth $70, $75. Now, if that same comic book gets optioned into a movie or a Disney Plus Marvel show, they may double in value. Timing and luck, right? Like a lot of things in life, or what the market dictates. And comparatively to other positions, are running backs underpaid? Yes and no, because the big positions that everyone's going to say you're going to pay before you get to a running back: quarterback, left tackle, cornerback, and wide receiver. I don't know necessarily where running backs should fall in the pecking order. Should they get paid more than a top flight tight end, a top flight D tackle, a top flight linebacker, safety, guard? I think we have the answers to that. I think it's no, because I think they're coming in, generally speaking, if you're like a top 7, top 10 player, less than comparatively, maybe not all, but some of those, top 5 players at certain positions. And it's not that I don't have sympathy for running backs' situation or what they perceive their situation to be, because I'm a big proponent of anybody out there getting as much money as they can. And this is a finite amount of time that they do have to maximize their earning potential. But I think, when we bring this back to the real world, I think we would all agree that someone like teachers are underpaid and that they should get paid more, right? I think that's a safe thing to say, not because my wife's a teacher, for what they have to deal with and the education that they need to get and higher education to go kind of up the ladder on their pay scale. They are underpaid compared to some other professionals and industries out there. But if teachers are going to get paid more, who are you going to take from? If you want to pay Paul, then you have to rob Peter, right? I guess I inverted that idiom. But here's the thing. Every town has a salary cap, just like the NFL has a salary cap. But it's called a budget. So if you want to pay teachers more, who are you going to take away from? Who's going to get paid less? Cops, firefighters, garbage men, judges, administration, school janitors? Who? You have to find someone that you're going to be pulling money away from to give it to, in this example, teachers. Same with running backs. If running backs are going to get paid more, then who as a GM are you going to pay less? It's not going to be the star quarterback, the star receiver, the star D-end or corner. You're going to have to make some decisions of, I guess we're going to have to go with a rookie or a young player on the O-line or at safety or at tight end or to pay my star running back more. You have to sacrifice. Even if the NFL was like Major League Baseball and there was no cap, I still don't think general managers would be paying running backs what they want to pay because of the burn and churn of the position. But everything in life has a value range associated with it. And right now, especially because the NFL is a passing league, and I can't imagine it ever going back to being a running-based league, right? It's like the NBA is not going back to the 90s and 80s. Scoring is just going to go up, 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 up. It's going to be all about offense. And while running backs are an integral part of the offense, especially starters, I've been hearing on Sports Talk, like, it's so important, like running game, 4-minute offense, you want to kill the clock, you got to run the ball. Yeah, you do, but you don't have to run it with your star. You could bring in your number 2 back. You could bring in your number 3 back if he's, the closer, like the hammer of the backs on your roster, the hardest runner. It's an interesting discussion. And I understand both sides of it. I think it's one of those situations where it is what it is. And I don't know ultimately how, things are going to get better. I have a thought, but I want to dive into Saquon Barkley, running back of the Giants. He was posturing earlier on in the week and last week about, is he going to sit out? I'm not sure if I'm ready to do that. I'm not going to show up for training camp. Was tagged $10.1 million franchise tag that he wasn't signing. Couldn't work out a long-term deal with the Giants, but he actually wound up signing a 1-year contract for $900,000 more than what the franchise tag is worth. So his 1-year contract could be worth up to $11 million. He gets $2 million up front immediately at signing and $900,000 in incentives. Those incentives being 1,350 rushing yards plus a playoff berth, 11 touchdowns, and 65 receptions. Last year was his career year. He had 1,312 yards rushing, 10 touchdowns, and 57 receptions, all under what his incentive marks are. Who negotiated this? Saquon, fire that person immediately and hire me. I don't have a law degree or sports law, but I promise you I could have gotten a better deal than this. On top of that, since he did not sign the franchise tag, Saquon can be tagged next year. However, he would not be eligible for a 20% increase. Players who get franchise tagged 2 years in a row get that. He would not. Now, if he signs a tag next year, apparently his tag amount could be worth up to $13.2 million. I've seen that in a couple different places. I'm not sure how it's calculated because I think the franchise tag is the average of the top, I don't know if it's 5, 10 players, or it's 3 players of that position. It is an average. And I don't understand, no running backs salary are going up this year to have the franchise tag number go up. In fact, running backs over the past couple of years have been the only position where the franchise tag number actually went down. Obviously based on what teams are or are not paying running backs. Now, signing a multi-year deal, even if it's one that Barkley thought was slightly under what he's getting paid, would have protected him, or should have gotten paid, or what he's worth. It would have protected him. Why? Because on a one-year deal, if he gets hurt, if he blows out his knee again, he's not getting a contract next year. The Giants aren't going to franchise tag him. If they sign him, they'll probably lowball the hell out of him. Plus, what do you think you're going to get, Saquon? You're 26 now. You're going to be 27. That's an extra year of wear and tear on you. Even if you're healthy, an extra year of 250 plus carries, however many receptions, however many hits you're going to take. You're not aging in reverse. You are less likely to get what you want a year later because you're a year older. Now, there were reports that earlier on in the offseason, the Giants offered Saquon a contract with a $13 million average with $26 million over the first 2 years. Now, that is guarantees and base salary. And the reason why I say that is, while I say the guaranteed money is most important, base salary goes in your pocket, Saquon. Unless you think you're going to get cut after this season and you would not be eligible for whatever base salary is part of your 2024 salary, if you could have gotten $26 million this year and next year versus rolling the dice on a one-year deal of not getting hurt and not seeing anything next year, why wouldn't you do that? And again, you're a year older. You're going to be 27, which compared to me is super young. But for a running back, you're in that tail end of teams saying, will we, won't we? And it's more likely going to be a no. Now, I'll take a little bit of a step back. These average annual values in running back contracts, agents screw these up all the time because there's so much phony back-end money that a running back will never see. It's posturing, it's dick measuring, dick wagging. So a player, an agent can say, oh, I got the largest annual value and this, that. Meanwhile, the last year of the contract, there might be a $12 million base salary that you're never gonna see. You're gonna get cut, and that's going to be gone. So whatever your contract says, subtract $12 million from that, as an example. But remember, this is how agents get paid. Agents are going to get a commission on your total contract. They're not going to give a shit when you get cut because they got their money already based on the total value of your contract signed on the dotted line. If the team winds up doling out $12 million less to you because they cut you, doesn't matter. You're still getting your 3% of $50 million, not 3% of $38 million. I wonder if the compromise is, do teams and GMs start treating running backs on their second contract like they do first-round picks? First-round picks get a 4-year deal with an option for a 5th, but it's fully guaranteed. Like Bijan Robinson, running back drafted by the Falcons, got $21.5 million, a 4-year, $21.5 million contract, fully guaranteed. Now that's more than a lot of other running backs, veterans, more guaranteed money than Nick Chubb got, more guaranteed money than Josh Jacobs is going to get on his 1-year deal, and same with Saquon on his 1-year deal. So I wonder, would the Giants and Saquon Barkley have signed something like 3 years, $24 million fully guaranteed? On your salary cap, it's clean, $8 million a year. Bang, bang, bang. You can't release him. I mean, you could release Barkley after the second year, but you would have an $8 million hit on the cap. So there's no base salary involved. This is the Kirk Cousins approach to running backs. Kirk Cousins, it's not Deshaun Watson guys that got the guaranteed money first as a quarterback. It was Kirk Cousins, but he was getting like 3 years, $75 million. I think was his first contract with the Vikings when he left the then Washington Redskins. $25 million guaranteed each year. That was his cap hit, right? You can't move that around if it's all guaranteed. If a running back knows they're going to get $24 million guaranteed. Now, of course, again, base salary is still money in their pocket. They're not going to leave any money on the table, but I wonder if a shorter deal, but a fully guaranteed deal for the running backs for their second contract would make sense. Now take Bijan Robinson as an example. Say he plays his first 4 years, he makes $21.5 million. Say he pays another 3, they don't pick up his 5th-year option for whatever reason. Say he plays another 3 years, $24 million guaranteed. That means he would have played 7 years, he would have made $45 million. Total guaranteed. That's not bad. Now after taxes, it's about 24 million, but you could still live off that. Again, don't buy 4 cars, don't buy 17 diamond earrings, like in gold chains. Be smart about it. You need 3 mansions. So lastly, and this is just humorous because it almost pours salt in the wound. The day after Saquon Barkley's contract, Justin Herbert, quarterback of the Chargers, signed the largest contract in NFL history. It averages $52.5 million a year, 5 years, $262 million, $133.7 million guaranteed at signing, $194 million in total guarantees. Now, let's go over Justin Herbert's he's been in the league 3 years. His 3-year average, 4,696 passing yards, 31.3 touchdowns, 11.7 interceptions. He started all but 2 games. And we'll say but he has a 25-24 regular season record, 0-1 in the playoffs. He was part of that huge collapse at Jacksonville in the wild card round. Justin Herbert is a very good player, obviously. It's translated on the field as stats. It hasn't translated on the field as wins, or as many wins as people are hoping for. His wins have increased in his 3 years from, I think, 6 or 7 wins to 9 wins to 10 wins this past year, 10-7 in a wild card berth. Now the expectations are through the roof, much like with Daniel Jones for the Giants, although he got, $40 million a year on average, and Justin Herbert's getting 52.5. It's crazy. Only $12.5 million more for Justin Herbert, who's in a different stratosphere than Daniel Jones. But the expectations now are, you got to win a playoff game or 2, Justin Herbert. You got to justify the contract because now you are making a lot of money. You are pulling from Paul to pay yourself. Salary cap, budgeting. You're getting all that money. You're going to have to make do with less talented players at certain positions. May not be on offense, may not be who you're throwing to, who's blocking for you, or who you're handing off to. But because you're getting so much of the pie, we have to go cheap elsewhere, which could affect our overall team's performance. Basic math, nothing that any of us should be surprised about. Now we're going to see, is Justin Herbert that transformational of a player? Can he transcend his team? Can he transcend and lift his team up if moving forward, he may not have as talented a team around him? You have Keenan Allen getting older. Austin Eckler has made some noise. He may want out after this year, although he'll probably play his contract out. What is going to happen when the quarterback eats up that much of the pie? And Austin Eckler, look no further than your quarterback as to why you are not getting paid closer to what you think. And in terms of team performance, that AFC, it's tough, man. Chiefs they're going to win that division until Patrick Mahomes decides not to play anymore. Denver should be better with Sean Payton. Raiders, we'll see what they are with Jimmy G. You got the Bills, the Jets, and the Dolphins in the East. You have the Bengals and the Ravens in the North. You got the Texans. I'm sorry. No, you definitely don't have the Texans. You have the Jaguars, a team on the come, and the Titans, a perennial playoff team. The AFC is tough to get out of, man. And that doesn't mean that you don't pay Justin Herbert. Of course you pay Justin Herbert. But why is it every time somebody gets paid, they have to be the highest paid? Just because you're next doesn't mean you're best. But if you're going to get paid that way, Justin Herbert, and I hope I draft you in fantasy, man, you're a beast. But you got to be more of a beast now. You got to be throwing high 30s, low 40s in touchdowns to make up for any deficiencies on your roster. And oh, by the way, Chargers, you're $50 million over the cap next year. So that concludes the 49ers Plus podcast for this week. Like always, I want to thank you for listening, to take time out of your busy schedule to listen to the podcast. There may be an extra podcast next week with Brock Purdy beginning to throw again at camp, training camp starting tomorrow. It just depends on how much news, my time management, if I can kind of scrape something together. Otherwise, the next podcast will be next Wednesday or Thursday. So regardless of when it drops, until then, be happy, be safe, stay healthy, and we will talk soon. Take care.